of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Julie Fine, I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, help is on its way. President Trump urging Iranians to keep protesting and to take over institutions while advising Americans there to leave the country. Also, Elon Musk's offer to help Iranians get around the government's internet blackout. We'll discuss it all with a key member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Chris Coons is standing by.
Motor City affordability. President Trump takes his economic agenda into a key battleground state.
I told people, I said, tariff is my favorite word. I said, my favorite word of every word is tariff. I've loved it for 40 years.
Trump pushes a slew of new economic ideas, taking his pitch on the road. But tonight, major banks warn his plan to cap credit card interest rates will have, quote, very bad consequences.
And Powell probe backlash. The DOJ investigation into the Fed chair fueling a wave of Republican pushback. Will this backfire on President Trump's next pick to run the Fed? Bloomberg with new reporting on who is driving this investigation behind the scenes. But we begin this evening with news here in Washington and Detroit, where the president took the podium at the Economic Club a short time ago, taking his economic message once again on tour. The president commenting as well on everything from Fed Chair Jay Powell to health care and, yes, the escalating situation in Iran.
To all Iranian patriots, keep protesting, take over your institutions if possible, and save the name of the killers and the abusers that are abusing you. You're being very badly abused, if the numbers are right. I've canceled all meetings with the Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. And all I say to them is help is on its way. You saw that I put tariffs on anybody doing business with Iran. Just went into effect today. And I say make Iran great again.
Joining us now, Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, as well as the Senate Judiciary Committee. And Senator, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. The president says help is on its way. What kind of help are we talking about?
Well, that's part of our challenge. I have no idea, neither do you, and neither do the Iranian people. President Trump used his favorite tool, tariffs. He just announced he's imposing 25% tariffs on anyone who does business with Iran. And I appreciate that he is speaking out in support of the protesters in Iran. But I wish, with equal force, if not more, he were speaking out on behalf of the Democratic opposition in Venezuela, that he were supporting those who were duly elected in the last Venezuelan elections and who had their elections stolen by Maduro. Look, President Trump ran in 2024 on a few simple things: lowering people's costs, making America healthy again, releasing the Epstein files, and avoiding new foreign wars. And in all four of those, I think he's headed in the wrong direction. Tariff is his favorite word.
Is that where we're going in Iran?
And it's hard to predict
Senator,
where he's going with that.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. He's already, of course, struck Iran once. That took place last year. What targets would be justified in this case? And would that mean a war with Iran?
That's a great question to which we in the Senate don't have a great answer. The American people deserve to know which war Donald Trump wants to start next, which country he wants to put our service members at risk in order to confront. The strikes that he ordered against Iranian nuclear sites were carried out flawlessly by our armed forces with no injuries or losses to the American service members who were involved, and that's a positive. But that's a very different thing from trying to punish the Iranian regime for killing protesters. There were specific sites, they had been targeted, and that particular action against the Iranian nuclear program had been planned and practiced for years. Where would we strike, and who would we hit, and how would we carry it out? This is exactly the sort of thing where previous consultation with Congress is called for. When we found out that they had been practicing for the kidnap, capture, and removal to the United States of Maduro for months, that made it clear that the senior administration officials who told us weeks before that that wasn't their goal, they were lying to us. And the Senate needs to be involved because the American people need to be involved in the decision to put our troops at risk. Whether Trump's next target is Colombia or Mexico or Cuba or Greenland or Iran, we should be consulting more regularly, and the American people need to know the risks and the costs.
Senator, I want to shift here to your leading a bipartisan congressional delegation to Copenhagen on Friday. What will be your message to leaders there, especially with President Trump's message on Greenland right now?
The United States and Denmark have had a close and enduring alliance for decades. When the United States was attacked on 9/11, Denmark was one of the first countries to come to our aid, and when we went into Afghanistan, Danish soldiers went and served alongside Americans. On a per capita basis, they lost more Danish soldiers in combat than any other NATO country. So our first message is thank you. Thank you for being a good and trustworthy ally. Second, it's to explore what is possible in terms of our shared interest in Arctic security. And then third is to talk with business leaders and elected leaders in Denmark about the potential for greater, closer economic cooperation. There are Danish companies that invest in and manufacture in the United States. There are opportunities for American companies in Greenland and Denmark. This is meant to be a positive, friendly, respectful conversation that may stand in sharp contrast to some of the recent threats that put the Danish leaders on edge and that puts our long and close alliance at some risk.
I want to point to something you just said about how you will be talking to business leaders there. Do you think that some businesses will simply stop doing business with the United States right now with the rhetoric going on surrounding Greenland?
I think that's a legitimate concern. Look, part of what has made the United States the best place in the world to invest is our deep capital markets, the rule of law, and predictable monetary policy. Unlike lots of countries in the world, we've always been a country where the president can't weaponize the Department of Justice to go after his enemies, where contracts are not messed with or fiddled with by a president based on his whims or interests, and where the Fed sets an independent monetary policy based on economic data. All of that is at risk. And when you put the rhetoric about Greenland on top of it, I think we are walking into, because of President Trump's rhetoric and actions against Jay Powell, his threats against Denmark and Greenland, and his actions in our region recently, we are at more risk than ever of going into a recession because other countries will stop being interested in buying our treasuries or investing in our country and our economy.
What's your goal on this, Codell, Senator? The Danish PM says the future of NATO is at stake. Is that how you see it?
Think about what that means. One of our most trusted and loyal allies in NATO saying that the future of this alliance that has kept us safe and secure and prosperous for 80 years, that is a staggering prospect. So this bipartisan and bicameral delegation is going to present ourselves in Denmark and Copenhagen to say we appreciate you, we value the NATO alliance, we respect your service alongside American soldiers in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we want to lower the temperature and find a more positive way through this moment.
Well, we want to talk to you when you get back from this, Codell, Senator. I'll be deeply curious to hear how the message is received. Today, the message from the White House is about affordability. It's a domestic one. The president was in Detroit, as you heard us discussing. You probably saw some of his address. It was not unlike the one he delivered in Pennsylvania or the one in North Carolina. We spoke with your colleague from Massachusetts right at this time yesterday, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who, of course, has been talking a lot about affordability and got a phone call from Donald Trump after she was criticizing his economic proposals in a speech at the press club. Senator, here's what she told us about that call.
I just want to say it was all about costs, about how we reduce costs for American families. And I've had proposals on the table for a very long time. Donald Trump has talked about proposals that would reduce costs, but so far hadn't lifted a finger to deliver. So for me, it's put up time.
So what should the president put up here, Senator? And did you ever think you'd see a day when Elizabeth Warren and Donald Trump are working together to lower costs?
No, I didn't, and they aren't. To be clear, President Trump's tariffs have raised costs on housing and housing production, on groceries, on health care. His decision to allow the Affordable Care Act subsidies to expire at the end of 2025 is doubling health care costs for millions of Americans. His decision to slap tariffs on lumber from Canada and wallboard from Mexico is raising the cost of producing housing. And his tariffs on a number of critical inputs to groceries in the average American family are raising those costs. Yes, gas prices have come down somewhat. But if you look at the total basket of costs that determine affordability for the average American family, it's gone up, not down. And the major driver of that has been Trump's tariffs, not something that Elizabeth Warren agrees with or supports.
Senator, I do want to ask, though, when you hear President Trump talking about credit card caps, talking about housing affordability, do you think that opens the door for you to work more with your Republican colleagues on Democratic priorities?
I have been talking to several Republican colleagues about bills that might move in a positive direction, rolling back some of the tariffs that are adding to the costs of housing, finding ways to support and advance the bipartisan housing policy proposals that my colleague, Senator Blunt Rochester from Delaware, and others, including Senator Warren and Senator Scott on the Banking Housing Committee, are moving forward. Affordability is clearly on the minds of millions of Americans, and there are things we have to do to address it. But in some ways, the most important, right in front of us thing we could do is for the Senate to take up the bill the House of Representatives just passed with 17 Republican votes to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies and keep affordable health care affordable for millions of Americans. That's right in front of us, and that's something that President Trump could push Senator Thune to put on the floor of the Senate. It would pass.
Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And as we mentioned, President Trump spoke at the Economic Club of Michigan earlier, where he provided updates on a few big topics. Joining us now to break it all down is Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson. Wendy, thanks so much for being with us. You heard Joe at the beginning say all of the topics that President Trump went through today. They went from Iran to affordability to Jerome Powell. What stuck out to you the most?
I think what stuck out to me the most is the frustration I could almost feel Chief of Staff Susie Wiles feeling as he rambled from topic to topic, as he made fun of Joe Biden's speech pattern, as he insulted Senator Rand Paul as a stone-cold loser. I mean, he really was there speaking to business leaders in a battleground state about affordability, and it was a subtopic. He occasionally brought it up and said, we're going to do something about it. His overall message in that speech, though, was this economy is Joe Biden's fault, and I've fixed it, and now the Democrats are trying to make it a campaign issue, and it was their problem to begin with. That's Trump's message, which is not exactly what White House staff and political staff want him to do. They want him to really focus on those policies that he's talking about. Stopping huge companies from owning individual houses, this credit card thing, which even as you and the senator pointed out, even Elizabeth Warren is like, hey, let's go do that together. There were possibilities there, but he can't seem to keep the message focused on that. It has to be everything else at once.
The White House, though, seems to have decided, not unlike the campaign, that letting Trump be Trump is the only method, and that having him outside of the White House is better than having him sit in the Oval meeting with world leaders all day. Is there a benefit to just having him on the road in front of people, knowing that, well, he's not going to be on the ballot in the midterms?
It might be. It might be in certain settings. I mean, if he did a rally outside the auto plant where he was cheered by workers there, if he did a rally to the voters who really, I think, still appreciate his stories and appreciate his, insults to people they don't like and all that. It all becomes very an inside joke. You didn't hear a lot of cheering or laughing or applauding at the Detroit Economic Club. It was very, very muted response to things. The only thing that got an applause line was the credit card proposal.
So read the room is what you
read the room, yeah.
Wendy,
I think so.
It's great to have you back. Wendy Benjaminson with us live in Washington. Coming up, oil markets responding after the president says he canceled meetings with Iranian officials, as we just discussed with Senator Coons. And Elon Musk's solution to Iran's internet blackout. We'll have that next on Balance of Power, only here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Julie Fine. Stocks falling today as inflation data failed to change bets for a pause on the Fed rate cuts. For all the details, let's turn now to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostic, who joins us from world headquarters in New York. Hi, Romaine.
Hey, Julie. We had a little bit of a turnaround in the market to the downside, unfortunately, today. And a lot of this seems to be a bit of disappointments on two fronts. First, on the economic front with that CPI report that we got this morning, a report that really didn't clear up a lot of things. And unfortunately for investors, that means they don't have any real clarity as to whether the Fed will indeed cut rates at its meeting at the end of this month or at the next two meetings following that. In fact, right now, pricing in the market says no one really has any certainty until at least we get maybe into the June meetings. And just a reminder, that June meeting would be the first without Jay Powell at the helm, assuming that doesn't happen sooner than later. The other issue, of course, was earnings. We got earnings out of J.P. Morgan and Delta Airlines, both disappointed. A kickoff to the earnings season that saw J.P. Morgan talking about a potential slowdown in some of its fee underwriting business and a potential increase in the costs, its own internal costs, as it tries to build out some of its technology capabilities. For Delta, it was all about a forecast that it gave that, quite frankly, Joe, was just not really up to snuff here. And you saw those shares pull back, and that kind of surprised investors, because remember, it was only just a few months ago where Ed Bastian, the CEO, was pretty bullish on the outlook for the travel sector. Today, they talked a lot on that conference call about geopolitics, Joe, and how that was actually affecting inbound foreign travel to the U.S., particularly for travelers from the Canada and China.
These conference calls are going to be awfully interesting as we make our way through this reporting season. And I'm curious about what happened today with L3 Harris, Romaine. This is a round trip. It was up like 10% in pre-market trading on news that the U.S. government is essentially taking a stake in another major company, in this case, a major defense contractor, $1 billion in the company's rocket motor business, but it barely closed higher. Are investors skeptical of this kind of stuff?
Yeah, you look at the 0.2% increase on the screen. The stock was up as much as 6% on one day. And we should point out, Joe, this stock has really been a darling for investors over the last couple of months, up about 20% just over the last few weeks. But we talk about the Trump administration taking a $1 billion investment. This is going to be through a convertible preferred security. So effectively, it would give the government priority rights to a certain extent, dilution to existing shareholders. $1 billion in that missile unit that L3 operates here. L3 really known for propulsion systems, warheads, guidance that it puts on U.S. missiles here. And while that $1 billion, I think, would be welcome under any other circumstance, the concern is, what exactly is the government's involvement? The CEO was quick to come out and say that the government has no voting stake, they're not going to sit on the board, and won't be involved in any sort of day-to-day decisions. But investors, well, a little concerned here that this mashup, while potentially beneficial, has some longer-term consequences that I think still need to be sorted out.
There's always more to the story, which is why we connect with Romaine Bostic every evening. Romaine, thank you so much. Live from New York. House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar today responding to the Trump administration's threats of getting involved in Iran. Here's what he said.
The president does not have the authority to go in, and this is part of this pattern. We don't know if this post is policy, but it's something that all of us are very mindful of, and we want the people of Iran to be safe. We don't want people exercising their opinions to die in the streets. But the president needs to consult with Congress on actions that involve the United States military.
And just a short time ago, Elon Musk making good on reports the president had asked him to make access to his Starlink satellite service, the satellite-based internet service, free for Iranians. Amid the countrywide blackout being imposed, he is now offering that free. And joining us with insights into all of this, Karim Sadjadpour, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Karim, it's great to have you with us as part of our conversation on Bloomberg. How would you describe this moment we are in, if not a prelude to war?
It's an existential moment for the Iranian regime, and it's a moment of great uncertainty for the United States. President Trump has put his own credibility on the line and U.S. credibility on the line. He's now threatened more than 6 times that if Iran continues to kill protesters, that he will take action. He said more than a week ago that the United States is locked and loaded if Iran kills protesters. Since then, Iran has killed perhaps thousands, maybe even more than 10,000 based on some estimates. So Iran's regime is on the line and U.S. credibility is on the line.
Karim, I'm curious, is help from the U.S. welcome in Iran, as you just explained the situation and how the numbers have gone up? What do the Iran protesters want from the U.S.?
You know, I don't want to paint Iran as a monolithic society, 92 million people. Even amongst protesters, there's probably different views. I would say at a minimum, what would be overwhelmingly welcome among Iranians is to help the country restore connectivity. It's a country in which the regime essentially throttles the internet, throttles satellite and cellular communications to kill its population in the dark. And we know that connectivity in Iran is around 1%. Images are not coming out. People can't communicate with the outside world. Iranians can't communicate with one another. So whether it's using offensive cyber capabilities, whether it's even using kinetic power to try to take out Iran's jamming equipment, restore connectivity, that is, I think, at a minimum. Now, whether to go beyond that, I think there's probably different views among the protesters on the ground. Many would welcome U.S. support at a minimum as a shield for them, not necessarily as a sword, but as a shield to help protect them from essentially a regime which is shooting live bullets at them.
How are the protesters communicating? You just went through, they have very little means, but yet they are in communication. So how are they getting around this communication blackout?
It's not clear to me that there is organized communication. You know, there are probably now in the thousands, if not over 10,000 Starlink terminals inside Iran now. So some people do have access to that, but it's very difficult when they shut off all forms of communication for people to really organize. This is, you know, for that reason, when you see, we've now seen collectively millions of Iranians take to the street over the last couple of weeks. That's very significant because each of those people knows that they're risking their life and they're not doing it with, you know, the communication tools that we have in open societies.
Mm-hmm. President Trump is telling U.S. allies and Americans, if there are any listening in Iran, to leave the country. Karim, what kind of panic or chaos might that create as people try to flee Iran?
You know, we've seen this once before last June when, during the 12-day war, President Trump actually implored residents of Tehran to evacuate the city, a city of perhaps 12 million people. It did create a lot of chaos and panic. Right now, people are living under essentially military rule in the city of Tehran. So there's probably in the hundreds, if not low thousands, of U.S. citizens still living in Iran. And, you know, that's a choice that they made knowing about the great uncertainty facing the country.
Karim, it's great to have you with us. Karim Sadjadpour, Senior Fellow, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thank you for the insights. Coming up, ExxonMobil's Darren Woods told President Trump Venezuela is uninvestable at the big oil meeting this week. And we're going to talk about what that means for the administration's plan for oil with Mike Sommers. He joins us from the American Petroleum Institute with big questions about what could be a decade-long and tens of billions of dollars investment in the Caribbean. It's straight ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
As you know, the inflation numbers just came out, and we have very low inflation, so that would give Too-Late Powell the chance to give us a nice, beautiful, big rate cut, which would be great. He's billions of dollars over budget, so he either is incompetent or he's crooked. I don't know what he is, but he certainly doesn't do a very good job.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Julie Fine. I'm Joe Matthew, president there. On his way out of town this morning, renewing his criticism of Fed Chair Jay Powell after the Justice Department opened a probe into the central bank's headquarters renovation that has, of course, sparked a strong rebuke from Powell, criticism from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. Today's Bloomberg Big Take story says the administration's actions against the Fed chair might have triggered backlash that could derail the White House's plan to tighten control over the Fed. Joining us now with their insights, Bloomberg's Kate Davidson, whose team helmed that big take piece alongside Bloomberg's Mike Dorning, who helps to lead our Capital Influence team. It's great to have you both here, and thank you for the great reporting on this. Kate, it's interesting that this hits the same day that CPI is out here, or the president who's looking for somewhat of a story to tell, and even if that's dashing hopes for an interest rate cut, this is a tough moment for Jay Powell. Or is it? It seems the president may have lost his own party on this one.
Yeah, it seemed like Jay Powell really came out swinging. I mean, I'm sure it was a difficult decision that he weighed with a lot of careful consideration to get on the video, to put out this strong statement. But, you know, now that he's done it, it seems like it's really galvanized support for the Fed. We really hadn't heard a lot from lawmakers, Republicans in particular, on the Hill throughout the year. Last year, as the president ratcheted up his pressure campaign. So it seems like this is a line that, you know, some folks in his own party think the president shouldn't be crossing.
Kate, and you detailed that in the article about how some investors are like, good job for standing up for yourself. Why do you think it took until now for Jay Powell to finally say, okay, I've had enough, get out the camera, I'm going to have a response and I'm going to have it now?
Well, there's certainly a lot of people, folks who we've talked to over these many months, and some who are former Fed officials themselves, who said, you know, there really was no upside to Powell picking a fight with the president. His strategy had been to keep his head down, to really stick with the message that the Fed is going to do its job without consideration for, you know, politics or outside pressure, and that engaging in some sort of back and forth would just invite more criticism that the Fed was political, which was part of the president's argument. So I think that what changed this time is this is a threat of you know, a criminal indictment, as the Fed put it. Of course, we heard or saw Jeanine Pirro say, no one's saying the word indictment except for Jay Powell, but that's certainly how it's being perceived. Something criminal, a criminal allegation or suggestion, feels like the Fed took that very differently from just a suggestion that you're doing a bad job.
Well, a lot of lawmakers did too, Mike Dorning, and let's bring you in on this, because the reaction on Capitol Hill has been pretty remarkable. The president, for the record, still says he didn't know about this, he wasn't involved in it, didn't tell DOJ to do this. But when you see the likes of Senator Kennedy calling this, you know, we need this like a hole in the head, sounding much like Elizabeth Warren, what does that tell us about reaction on both sides of the aisle?
Well, it tells you that a lot of the establishment Republicans are really concerned about this. And then you did have someone right out the bat who was someone who's not running for re-election and thus not afraid of a primary challenge, say, hey, I'm going to block every Fed nominee until Trump folds on this. Tom Tillis, North Carolina. And that essentially can roadblock the nominations unless you can have broader people overrule it. You had another Republican also insulated from Trump retaliation, Lisa Murkowski, come out and say she would back him up. And then you have the other Republicans start to talk more. John Thune saying this would really be challenging if I had to do it.
And Senator Kramer saying, I do not believe that Powell is a criminal. So at this point, this is one of the first times we've really seen some cracks in the base. And why do you think it's this specific instance with things that have happened all along that, quite frankly, do affect congressional members in their districts, that it's this one that people really got more outspoken?
Well, I really think it's three things. One, Kate points out, Powell came out hitting hard. I think that made a big difference. Number two, Tillis, who has nothing to lose, right away takes up that charge and says, no way, I'm going to block things. And then thirdly, this is something that a lot of establishment Republicans are legitimately concerned about. They're worried about long-term inflation. They're worried about investors losing confidence in the dollar over time. So this is something that really goes to their worries, and it goes all the way back to the Reagan era, was when the Fed beat inflation in the late 70s, early 80s, that the country turned around. Most people remember what that was like.
Well, you know, and this is, of course, getting back to the spirit of the big take story. This could undo a lot of what the White House is trying to do in reshaping the Fed. Could we be in a world in which Jay Powell decides to hang around till 2028, maybe not as chair, or could there be a world in which the Senate blocks the next pick that Donald Trump puts forth, and Jay Powell's still kind of running the place. He could still be chair of the FOMC.
I mean, there are a lot of different scenarios and pathways for sure, Joe, but I think that we can't rule anything out. I think it's definitely a possibility. And certainly we've heard, our reporting is that administration officials, people inside the White House, see it as maybe more likely that Powell sticks around. He wouldn't necessarily remain as the chair of the FOMC, but his colleagues could look to him as another sphere of influence, if you will. His term as chair ends in May, but as you said, he has another 2 years where he could remain as a board member.
Right. So I guess the calculation is changing as we speak here. Does Jay Powell just sit quietly for now?
He has a lot of leverage. I mean, he doesn't have to say what he's going to do for many, many months, and he doesn't have to do anything. His term ends, he can just stay there. So it doesn't require any action. I think he sits and waits for a while.
Kate, it's so great to have you here. Thanks so much for being with us. Mike Dorning as well, thank you for being with us. And President Trump is continuing his push for U.S. companies to invest at least $100 billion rebuilding Venezuela's oil sector following the capture of President Maduro. However, some executives worry conditions won't permit a speedy turnaround. ExxonMobil's Darren Woods even told President Trump that Venezuela is currently uninvestable, ordering these warnings issued by oil industry leaders and analysts. The president responded negatively to Woods' comments, saying he didn't like them and he was inclined to keep Exxon out of Venezuela. Joining us now here in our Washington bureau with his insight is Mike Sommers, president and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. Mike, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be with you.
I know you have your conference this week, so we really appreciate you coming over. And I have to ask, I'm sure Venezuela, of course, top of mind there. Curious how you're talking to the White House right now. Are you dealing with the energy secretary about assurances if anybody does want to invest in Venezuela?
Absolutely. We are working closely with the Department of Energy, the Department of Interior, and the White House on the topic of Venezuela. The truth is, Venezuela is not an attractive place to invest right now, but it could be if we get the prerequisites in place, including getting the rule of law right in the country, letting capitalism flourish, but also security guarantees for American oil and gas workers.
You heard the CEO of Exxon, obviously, and we just referred to that, having serious reservations about that. Are you hearing from other oil executives that may seem a little more open to that?
Well, remember the position that ExxonMobil is in. They've had their assets seized twice in the country of Venezuela. So, of course, they're hesitant to jump back in. But at the same time, what Darren said to the president on Friday was, if we get the right conditions on the ground, we're ready to jump back in. In fact, he said he was ready. He had a plane ready to send people down there to make assessments. So I do think that there's interest in investing again in Venezuela. It is a huge resource, particularly in the Orinoco Belt. And that also happens to have the kind of oil that is refined here in the United States, that heavy oil. Most of that oil has been replaced by Canadian crude at this point. But we certainly have an interest in continued investment in Venezuela, but we have to have the prerequisites in place first.
You're right about what Darren Woods said, and I'm wondering how we quantify the changes that are needed to get a company like ExxonMobil on the ground. Have you had those conversations between the company and the administration? We're hearing reports of not just militias going through Venezuela. You've got motorcycle gangs supporting the interior minister and a lot of people who would benefit from kidnapping either an American executive or a contractor at work there. Do we need a military security guarantee?
I am confident that the investment will flow to Venezuela, but it's going to take time.
Yeah.
The easiest barrels to get right now are actually where Chevron is operating, in Maracaibo Lake. They've been there for over 100 years. Yep. There are probably a residual 100,000 or so barrels that they can get online very quickly. It's that Orinoco Belt, which is in the Amazon jungle, where those militias are operating, where there are tons of Venezuela guerrillas operating there as well. By the way, the environmental cleanup that is going to have to occur as a consequence of leaving that asset to rot and rust over the course of the last 20 years is significant. So there's going to have to be cleanup. There's going to have to be significant remediation of the assets that are down there right now. But the asset is still incredibly valuable.
Is
and
that
there will be
government
investment.
money? Do you need subsidies to do that? Or does the industry say, you know what, we're going to write the check because we're going to make the money?
The industry is not interested in government subsidies. What we need is rule of law, and we need policy changes, and we need security for the American workforce.
This is also a time where the industry has a lot of opportunity when you especially look at data centers, when you look at businesses, when you look at some states actually turning more to gas.
That's what our whole conference has been about today. It's all been about what we call the demand decade. We know that energy demand is going up. It's going through the roof right now. That means more oil, more natural gas in particular. And so the real question for us is, where are we going to get that supply that is out there? We know that all energy sources are going to be part of it, which is why we've been advocating for comprehensive bipartisan permitting reform that has to get done in 2026.
Are you comfortable that it will?
I think it can get done. I think both sides need to put down their swords. We know that Barack Obama had a war on coal. Joe Biden had a war on oil and gas. We need to make sure that both sides put their weapons down and start focusing on getting bipartisan reform done, and quickly.
I guess this president has a war on wind based on what we hear from him. But I'm curious, when you talk about the demand decade, does oil from Venezuela and Iran play into that?
Absolutely, it does.
So you're factoring that into your forecast?
We're going to need it.
Yeah.
But the base of supply is going to continue to come from the United States of America. We produce more oil, more natural gas than any country has in the history of time. One of the reasons why oil prices have gone up today is because the fear factor about what's going to happen in Iran and what would happen if the United States went in and they used their assets to go after a country like Saudi Arabia, which has happened before. But the security that American production has provided. You think about where we were in 2007, before our companies were kicked out of Venezuela. The United States was only producing 5 million barrels of oil every single day. Now we're producing 13 million. We've replaced those Venezuelan barrels with Canadian barrels and American barrels. That's a great news story and provides us energy security that we didn't have in 2007.
But with possible need for more oil, getting Congress on board to return to that, I mean, how quickly do you need that to happen, and how much cooperation are you seeing from either side or both sides of the aisle?
We're seeing a lot of cooperation. In fact, the policy change that we've seen in the Trump administration has been dramatic, lifting the LNG mandate, allowing us to drill in the Gulf of America, lifting the LNG pause. The support that this administration has given to this industry has been tremendous. We can build on that success. I know that there's more production that can happen here in the United States, of course, in the right regions and at the right price.
Interesting comments from the Energy Secretary today, Chris Wright, who spoke with us immediately after that meeting that you were in at the White House the end of last week, that the U.S. would happily partner with Iran on oil if the regime falls. What would that look like? And are American companies preparing for a deal like that?
Well, American companies have been there before.
Yeah.
I mean, remember...
This is back to the future in both countries we're talking about.
That's exactly right. And there's tremendous assets in the country of Iran. Imagine what Iran could produce. It's already the 6th largest producer of oil in the world.
What could it be?
What it could be, if we got Western engineering there and upgraded their equipment, they could be an energy superpower again. And the good news is that the world is going to need that energy into the future.
When you say what it could be, but how long would that take?
Of course it would take a long time, which is why it's so important that we continue to invest here in the United States, in the Gulf of America, on federal lands and on private lands, and in the Permian and in the Bakken and in the state of Alaska.
Well, let's stay in touch on this because it sounds like we've got a lot of moving parts here. Mike, thank you. Mike Sommers, President CEO of the API, the American Petroleum Institute, live on Bloomberg. Coming up, House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer is threatening Bill Clinton with a contempt prosecution after the former president defied the committee's subpoena. He was a no-show today, and we'll bring you details with our political panel coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Julie Fine. I'm Joe Matthew. Thank you for joining us. House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer says contempt proceedings have begun against former President Bill Clinton, posting this video of an empty committee panel chair. I'll just describe this for those of you on the radio, with Bill Clinton's name on it after the former president failed to appear at a deposition this morning regarding the Epstein probe. Clinton earlier made clear he would ignore the subpoena. Nobody thought he was going to walk through the door, posting a letter on social media denouncing the investigation having repeatedly denied any knowledge of Epstein's crimes. Hillary Clinton has also been subpoenaed. Her deposition is scheduled for Wednesday, though the former Secretary of State, again, not expected to appear. Joining us now to talk about this and more, this evening's political panel, Matt Gorman is back with us, Republican strategist, chief communications officer at Targeted Victory, with Democratic strategist Megan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden. It's great to see both of you with us, and thank you. Bill Clinton just can't stay out of the news here, Megan. I'm not sure what's going on, although maybe the administration wants it that way. What's happening?
I mean, I think it tries to take some of the heat off of President Trump, but I think the Clintons, they didn't do anything wrong. They've given sworn statements. I think their whole thing is Pam Bondi is breaking the law. They didn't release the files, so let the public view for themselves. Release all the files and let the public make their conclusion. And if people still think the Clintons are at fault, then they can cross that bridge then. But everyone knows that Bill Clinton knew Jeffrey Epstein. That's not a secret, so I'm not sure what the point of hauling them up there except for a political stunt is.
You know, you're hearing some Republicans say about Republicans right now, this is a distraction when it comes to Jerome Powell. Is this just another distraction that now Republicans have to deal with?
They didn't think it was a distraction all summer when that's all they wanted to talk about. I mean, look, I recognize I got a better chance of growing hair than Clinton does walking in that hearing room. But look, I think this is a chance for Republicans to, after, 3 months or 4 months of just beating on the head with this issue, to finally go on offense. They're going to relish it. But it's also one of those fights in Washington where both sides enjoy it, right? It's certainly the Clintons will enjoy taking on House Republicans, but we like taking on the Clintons. We have for 40 years, so why stop now?
This is Back to the Future all the way around here today. But the fact remains that those Epstein files were supposed to be released weeks ago, and less than 1% has been made public. And no one's talking about it. How come?
I mean, I think there's everything else going on in the news, right? Where went into Venezuela. We are now healthcare still isn't being passed. Things still aren't affordable. We're doing all sorts of other things. I just think that Democrats are making the point that they are breaking the law, and I think that needs to continue to be made. But also the victims and the public want to see these files and need to see these files. So just get them all. I'm not sure why President Trump doesn't just rip off the Band-Aid and release them all. I think it would make this story go away faster.
Well, like Megan just said, is it better if they just come out now so that the Republicans can discuss it and then move on to talking about other things like affordability and things they're saying are really important for the midterm elections?
Look, I think one of the hallmarks of Trump's Washington is it's not necessarily linear, like, hey, we can talk about this, then we can talk about this, then we're going to move on to affordability. The hallmark of the Trump era is everything all at once and everywhere all at once. And so I think there's the idea that we're going to have an orderly thing, we're going to talk about this and that, I think is not necessarily the case. Now, look, I think that Republicans do not want to be talking about Epstein, and it seems like Bill Clinton doesn't want to talk about Epstein either. So there's half of these stories is very short. It seemed like Jerome Powell's on the front page just 24 hours ago, and we're barely talking about that, it seems, right now, except for the last segment.
Funny how that works around
here. It does.
And, if you're the president, you might want us to be talking about affordability. He went to Detroit today, delivered a speech before the Economic Club, much like the one in Pennsylvania and in North Carolina. It's the theme here in the affordability tour. But even the president doesn't talk about affordability in many cases. On the affordability tour, he hit Iran today, talked about Jay Powell and any number of other stories. Is the messaging getting confused?
I mean, I think we could probably be saying that for the last 10 years about Donald Trump. It eventually gets out there, but he's never one to be having a tight some speech. That's his hallmark.
Maybe it doesn't matter, though. You tell me it's better for him to be on the road.
I will say this on the issue of affordability. I don't think you will hear the words, at least consistently, affordability from the White House. They will use other words. They'll use cost. They'll use prices. I think the way they view it is if Mamdani and Trump are using the same word to talk about the economic climate right now, it means very different things to each person. Use their own word, use their own dichotomy.
They text.
I know. I would love to see those texts.
Let's talk about the Republicans now talking about affordability. Does this open a lane for Democrats to say, sure, we're happy to work with you on this if you want to?
Well, yeah, and you just saw that the Senate didn't pass the ACA subsidies extension, so they're not clearly working on affordability because 14 million people are going to not be able to afford health insurance. So I find that interesting. But also, Donald Trump chose to go. He should be on the road. That is what you should do as the president. You should go out and see the American people. You shouldn't hunker down in Washington. But he went to Detroit, a place that he has shown a lot of contempt for. And manufacturing is the #1 industry there. Manufacturing jobs, they've lost over 100,000 jobs since he's been president. It's gone down for 9 months in a row. That's not the place to go talk about affordability.
We didn't hear hoax today. Did we call it a Democrat hoax? I didn't hear that in the speech.
I didn't hear any.
And I listened to most of that. That means Susie Wiles is getting to it.
Again,
am I right?
If you expect a disciplined stump speech, whether it's 2015 or today from Donald Trump, you're not going to get it. Yeah. That's just a fact.
Yeah. Is it better for him to go to places like deep red states, like Texas, where he gets big, adoring crowds and does the rally-like
I think it's a mix.
situation?
I think it's a mix of both. And we've been talking about this for a couple of years now, right? When I was coming in politics, Republicans did better in the off-year elections. We had more reliable off-year voters. That's flipped. So what's such a key to this? We know Democrats are going to crawl over broken glass to vote this November. We have to get our guys out that vote for Trump in the presidential years, but don't come out other times. And I think that is the key. If those are in red states, great. If those are in more purple districts, say Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and other areas, that's important too. I think they have to be very smart about where they send him, because also he doesn't do as many rallies anymore after Butler, so they have to be smart.
Yeah. Does taking pages from the progressive playbook, capping interest rates on credit cards, banning institutional buyers from the housing market, help to that end for Trump and Republicans?
Do you know what would help? Rolling back the tariffs. That is a terrible economic policy.
The Supreme Court might do that tomorrow.
That's very true.
Every single person has been impacted by. So these one-off policies are not really actually helping the entire, all of the American
Sanders
people.
calls him an opportunist. Do you feel like he's copying your homework?
110%. That there's just no other way to look at that, because these policies actually aren't impactful without bringing down costs.
But on the other hand, you do see at times the president talked about in the campaign no tax on tips. And then that, I mean, is it something that both sides are going to be trying to own the winning issues?
But no tax on tips affects like 2.5% of the population, and it's capped at 2 or 3 years. That is not something that affects 100% of the population like tariffs do. And the cost that tariffs are driving up affect everybody. Everybody is feeling it at the grocery store, at the gas station. So it's just like, that is a great policy, and that's actually a great accomplishment for Republicans that was in the big, beautiful bill. But that is not encompassing of where we are economically.
You're going to be hearing inflation lowest since 2021. But I think one of the things, again, the Supreme Court's going to have a very interesting opinion when they come out on this. Roberts is an executive power maximalist, so he's going to want to give deference on the tariffs. They're certainly not going to want to pay them back. I think that is a red line. You won't see the Supreme Court cross trillions of dollars. But is there some mechanism where they limit Trump and also limit future presidents from doing something like this?
Right, yeah.
Having to pay it back.
Well,
That's
these are
what I'm
really
watching.
smart questions. The president put on Truth Social, President of the United States, if the Supreme Court knocks down the tariff regime, he wrote, "We're screwed," in all caps. I don't know if that's normal language for the president.
I'm so glad you said it, not me.
Well, is he right? What's he projecting?
That might be tame language, for, as we know from Donald Trump. Yeah. But look, they will find ways around it. That's number one. But they don't want to have to do that. I think I'm going to be watching this opinion very closely, not just for Trump, but for other presidents. Because look, the legislation they use to justify this, IEPA, is the same one we use for Iran sanctions.
Wow. A lot there. Matt Gorman, Megan Hayes. Tomorrow could be a big one. Thank you so much both for your insights, and to learn more about the stories we've been covering, check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online. And thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll meet you back here tomorrow, only here on Bloomberg.